Hello and welcome once again to another video in the series called Minds on Guard, where we're taking a look at media, the ways that we interact with it, some history behind how it was formed, how we have come to the place where we are today. In the last couple videos, we've been looking at some foundational material with regard to the types of psychology that are at work in the modern education system of America. This has a connection to the way that media plays on our behaviors and the ways that it is used to affect our emotions and control us through various socialization measures, the means of programming through the school system, and the ways that has played out over time in American society. We looked at some major players in the game as far as the developmental schemes from a psychological perspective, specifically a man named Wilhelm Wundt, a little bit of a guy named G. Stanley Hall, and we took a deeper dive into one of Hall's students, John Dewey, last week. Dewey's work would be incredibly important, specifically for the duration of American schooling, especially up till today. His influence has touched every single part of American culture, particularly any part that has been guided or shaped by any type of mandatory federal or state curriculums. We're going to look a little bit more into the details of what Dewey and the experimental psychologists were up to, specifically with the idea of socialization and removing the inherent individualism of each student. This is a very subtle topic, and it might rub some people the wrong way. You might not necessarily see how it's playing out, but just bear with me and take this in with a grain of salt, see what you think, and we'll get started here with some more nuanced conversation as to the workings of this socialization in education. I hope you enjoy. Okay, so in the last video, we were talking a bit about the shift in the philosophical underpinnings of the American education system. Recall that we learned that originally our education system was one that prized and valued individualism and the ability to think and reason on our own. And this was shifted by Dewey and his colleagues into more of a guided, directed, outcomes-based model where the teachers weren't necessarily there to provide an environment where a student would learn how to think critically. Instead, they were there to instill a value, or at least direct the students toward the preferred or desired outcome, thus ensuring that a child would think in a preferred or approved manner. So this philosophical shift in education is actually foundational in modern American schools today. It's been in place for so long that many of us really probably don't recognize the signs and the effects of what is actually going on and what is being done to a student's mind or even your own mind when you're being taught in this way. The fact remains that modern schooling has been shifting more and more into an institution of social indoctrination on a broad scale, really ever since the 1960s and actually before that. If you've ever taken a class with the word education or studies attached to it, or even just the suffix ed, this is where you'll see the types of institutional programming taking place that I'm referring to. It would be good to consider the types of courses that qualify as this, or that carry these types of labels. Most of these are going to be contained within what's known as the social sciences, and they are all geared towards learning about a specific aspect of human life or culture or some idiosyncratic subgrouping of society. Things like African American studies or women's education, media studies, gender studies. These are just a few of the, quote, fields of study of which I am referring to, and they can all trace their philosophical underpinnings to the core principles of Wilhelm Wundt and John Dewey. Now note that I said the philosophical underpinnings. What I'm going to be talking about here really deals with a lot of the core subject matter, not necessarily the surface level attributes. And I think that's a really important distinction to be made, and something that I would hope that we continue to carry with us as we study this kind of material, and really carry that with you through your whole life. It's only by digging to the core that we actually find the truth of a matter or any type of subject. It's very easy to get distracted by surface level or even nested attributes of something. So with that in mind, we'll continue. If we consider the classical subjects of, say, like mathematics or the natural sciences, even history and literature, they have historically been removed from the same types of socialization that we see in other areas of our modern education system. That's shifted dramatically in recent years, really last few decades, which is troubling in its own right. The movement from these like really core foundational topics and subjects that are intrinsically connected to the truth of reality, they're being pulled and shifted into a different sphere of existence where humanity is attached to them, and they get to be distorted in some way to suit a socialization agenda. Mathematics being racist or something like that is really what I'm thinking about. And that's something that we'll cover a little bit later, but for now it's good to think about. These things are troubling in their own right, but the reasons that the classical subjects are typically less geared towards the socialization is because it's far more difficult to assign values or like a moral ideology to these things. Again, with the example of mathematics, they are as they are. You can't do anything to them that would actually qualify as being real and connected to truth. It's quite illogical to use mathematics to determine a social aspect of society regarding the values in any particular culture. You can't assign something like that to the quadratic formula. It just doesn't hold water. It's not connected to reality. So the programmers turned to the social sciences, and this is what they use to achieve the aims of shifting what is viewed as most important in the education process of a child. In the book Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, Charlotte Iserbyt makes a point to expose the concept of values clarification in the primary school education. With the ideas of Wilhelm Wundt in mind as far as experimental psychology and behavior manipulation, this means that children are being trained to respond to stimulus by choosing the, quote, correct response to various situations. One such example is known as the lifeboat test. This is where children are given a hypothetical scenario where they are placed in a lifeboat that can only hold a certain number of people. Let's say it's 15, but there are 18 people in the classroom. They're then told to make a decision as to who gets to get in the lifeboat and who's going to be left out of the lifeboat and will therefore die as a result. The children are then guided through the process, the decision-making process, by the teacher, and ultimately choose which three of their fellow students are the unlucky ones and must suffer a terribly grim fate. Bear in mind, this is an exercise posed to children about which life is more valuable than another. Thinking about this, we have to ask questions like, what types of effects does this kind of learning have on a child's mind? Do you think it might leave a lasting impression as to which types or specific people's lives are more valuable than others? And then by what criteria are they making these decisions? Is it the teacher's values? Is it their own? If it's the teacher's, what are the values of the teacher? What morality do they hold to? Also, how does this help a child learn to think about the world and reason through problems well? How does it shape a child's worldview? What modes of thinking is this reinforcing in a child's mind regarding thinking that the correct choice regarding any given set of decisions is going to have this kind of weight? I do think these are just a few important questions that get to the issues that this kind of values clarification teaching methodology poses. There are many others as well, and we must return to some more historical content to dive deeper into just what sorts of values are at the heart of these programming tactics. One such value, or I guess some sort of cultural movement that should be considered, would be the eugenics movement. And it was a very important area of history and a very important type of thinking to understand, specifically as we move forward in the concept of the elites and the people that control the outcomes that we're talking about. I will return to the subject of the Leipzig School and John Dewey and his cohorts, as well as the historical progression of education in America. And I'll attempt to make some connections to the current state of news media in another video. But I'd like to briefly shift and present some other conceptual information and explore what has happened to society as a result of what was introduced to schools back in the early part of the 20th century. Much of this will be my own opinion as it stands right now, but I hope to back this up with evidence in future videos and clarify the connections that I'm seeing in a deeper way. Earlier, I introduced the concept of values clarification. This is a very important topic as it has a direct and highly significant correlation to what would be today referred to as, quote, woke ideology or worldviews. Anyone who is at all concerned with any form of social justice or intersectionality, collectivism, or equity-based thinking as it pertains to the outcomes for people within societal systems is inherently operating from a philosophical position that has been deeply affected by the programming that happens when the kinds of values clarification training that I referenced before is allowed to perpetuate within any society, or particularly the school systems. My purpose for targeting groups who are concerned with these kinds of issues is not political in any way, nor am I directing any of my claims at any specific group of people. Rather, I take direct aim at the ideology and the logic that's contained within it. I'm of the opinion that people who have taken on these worldviews have been led deeply, deeply astray into errant thinking and quite delusional frameworks that are set against the objective truths that we observe in reality. I think that this has been done on purpose, and I believe that it is a highly coordinated, deceptive, and long-lasting effort to obscure and destroy the concept of objective truth at such a large scale where people actually are trained and prefer to be blind in the areas where they've been misled. To quote a really great thinker in my life, the truth is a component within the universe and one that sentient, intelligent beings can observe, but the universe and truth are independent of the sentient, intelligent beings' acknowledgement or denial of either. I'll write that out in the comment section below, and I hope you sit with it and think about it for a little while. It's a very important subject and a very important concept to wrap our minds around. Reality is as it is, and there's no amount of emotion or ideology that's going to change that. I think it's important that we dig in and dig deep into what it means to deal with the truth, and to what it means to really live in this world with one another and amongst each other in the ways that reflect love, that reflect goodness, that reflect truth. And we should seek those as our highest aim possible. Again, that's the purpose for this video series. I've endeavored to make these in order to call attention to the need to steel our minds, to develop the ability to think more critically than we do. We might not think critically very much at all, and I believe it is more crucial than ever in the world at this time period to really dive deep and learn how to deal with reality as it is, in truth and love. So until the next video, I hope you're all staying safe, I hope you're looking out for one another, and I hope you will continue to remain diligent and vigilant with your minds on God.